In the years following the arrival of William's army at Pevensey, the Normans tightened their grip on England, now part of a kingdom that extended across the Channel. Across the land, William's men took over every position of power in the state and in the church. Within 60 years, the monk and historian William of Malmesbury could write,
"No Englishman today is an earl or bishop or abbot. The newcomers gnaw at the wealth and guts of England, nor is there any hope of ending the misery."
He wrote in Latin. Written English, which had managed to establish itself so boldly before the conquest, was now dying. It breathed its last here. Now Peterborough Cathedral, in the mid-12th century, part of Peterborough Abbey.
And a Moniques mit him to Oxenford to the king, and he gaf him that abbot region.
Around the country, monks had been recording the great events of the last 650 years in books known as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles. They were written in the language of the people, English, and there was nothing like them anywhere in mainland Europe.
He was also at Ramsey, and at Tourne, and at Spal, and knew his abbot.
Since the Norman conquest of 1066, these unique accounts had been abandoned one by one. The Peterborough Chronicle was the last survivor. In 1154, a monk recorded that the abbey had a new abbot, a man with a very French name of William de Watteville.
Is chosen author of himself. Willem de Watteville is gehaten, good clerk and good man, and fair have it begun.
He has made a good beginning, the monk writes.
Christ is him ure.
Christ grant that he may end as well. With this last entry, 6.5 centuries of written history came to an end. Old English had ceased to be the language of record in the land. But that didn't mean that it was going to go away. Since the conquest, English in varying dialects had remained the language spoken by 90% of the population, from the south coast to the uplands of southern Scotland, just a few miles north of here. Even further north in Scotland and west in Wales, the culture and language was still Celtic. Old English had continued to develop and change, partly as a result of contact with the language of the Danes, particularly here in the north. The grammar was becoming simpler. More plurals were being formed by adding an S. Naman, for example, the Old English plural of name, became names, which would become our names. Prepositions were performing more of the functions of the old word endings, and word order was becoming more fixed. Despite being the officially ignored language, English would continue to evolve and change, and it would endure, resisting and absorbing the invaders' language until the time came for it to resume centre stage as a nation's language.
The French influence on the English language as a whole is enormous in terms of vocabulary, not in terms of grammar, but in terms of vocabulary. It's unmatched by any other language. For example, fruit replaces the Old English wastum. Pretty quickly, within the space of about 40 or 50 years, wastum simply isn't used. But the majority of words don't replace Old English, they stand side by side with them. So we have a word like apple in Old English meant any kind of fruit. Whereas what happens is because fruit comes in and is basically expresses that, apple starts to mean a very specific sort of a fruit. I think it's not true to say that, generally speaking, French words came into the language and ousted the Old English words out of it. Generally, what seems to happen is that the Old English word simply narrows in meaning.